So welcome. My name is Ron Vogel. I am president and CEO of an organization called the National Design Alliance. And our principal program nationally is called Reimagine America's Schools. We've been working now for 2 years. We are funded by a grant from the Schmidt Foundation, Schmidt Futures. And our focus really has been on working with school districts on leveraging the investment in school facilities to help support new ways of teaching, new ways of learning, especially around what some call active learning, STEM, STEAM, maker, space, and so forth. So we had the great good fortune of working last year with a group of folks in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania and Northern West Virginia on one of the most remarkable projects I think I've seen nationally and maybe even beyond. Reimagine America's Schools, our organization, were invited to join Remake Learning, which is a Pittsburgh-based organization, in a unique, the words, I don't know how to describe it because it just sounds like hyperbole, but it was unique, it was bold, it was visionary, inspiring. And as I said at the beginning, I've never seen anyone do anything like this. A group of local Pittsburgh area funders, who we'll meet a little later, came together to create an initiative where they selected 16 agencies, organizations, and schools to create 16 unique active learning centers and unique design challenges. And these funders gave these 16 agencies each a $50,000 grant. Now, if you've been involved in school construction and school design, you know that's not a gigantic budget. But what did we learn from these projects? That's what we're here to find out about today. So the first thing that Reimagine America's Schools did was recruit a national team of architects. This is a part of what we do in our work. We brought those architects into Pittsburgh to work with a team of Pittsburgh architects. Altogether, we had over 20 architects and 13 Pittsburgh firms involved in working with these 16 organizations and agencies, all pro bono. So we're deeply grateful to those architects who gave their time and their passion and gave up their fees to do this work. And I think one of the things we found out that a small project with a minimum budget can be more challenging even than a budget that's quite adequate. Today, we're going to be looking at these projects as a very hands-on convening. We're going to be hearing brief presentations on each of the 16 projects. We'll also be meeting with a panel of architects that were involved in the projects. And then we'll also be joined by members of the funders who were involved. Now, the three organizations that funded this program were Grable Foundation, Benetton, and Hillman Foundation. So we have representatives from the two of those foundations, Greg Baer from Grable and Jim DeNova from Benetton. We're very happy that you're joining us today. I think the objective for us in bringing together this presentation is to provide inspiration and strategies for other educators around the country. Even though this was a local in nature, a local program or a local initiative, I think the implications have national importance. We're thinking about in that time when the pandemic is in our rearview mirror and educators are wanting to do something new and exciting in their community, but they may not have a budget to do it. Well, here are 16 examples of how people have repurposed libraries, repurposed tired old classrooms that were underutilized, or maybe taken that basement room that's been used for storage and converted into an exciting learning space. So we hope that this not only inspires educators across the country, but also gives you strategies and ideas that you can use in your own community. Now, while today is just a very high-level summary, we are going to provide contact information for you so that if you want to find out more about any one particular project or more than one, we'll provide guidance for you to be able to reach out and find out more about those programs. One thing before I turn the program over to my colleagues, I just want to make a note, a calendar note, that our next convening is going to be on December 1st. We're convening a forum on the topic of designing for equity and inclusion in schools. And we think it's going to be a very rich conversation and an informative conversation. So I hope you'll make a note and plan to join us. We'll be presenting that with the Siegel Family Foundation. Our good friends there have joined us on several forums this year. So let's move on to the content of the day. Again, welcome. And thank you for sending us notes from very interesting places. Hello, Seattle. So I'm going to introduce two colleagues who really drove this program. And I think when we got into it, we didn't know how complicated and how challenging it was going to be. So the people that I'm about to introduce made it happen. Ani Martinez, from the field director from Remake Learning, and Carrie Leonard, director of architecture for Reimagine America Schools. I turn it over to Ani and Carrie now for the first round of presentations. Thank you both, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Ron.
Good morning and good afternoon, or whatever time zone you're in. So we really appreciate your being here. I'm Carrie Leonard with Reimagine America Schools.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ani Martinez. I'm with the Remake Learning Network here in Southwestern PA and North Central West Virginia.
As we start to talk about the program and the projects, Ron mentioned if you have questions to be able to reach out. So I put Ani's email and my email up on the screen. I'll put that up again at the end of the presentation. But we're happy, Ani and I are happy to answer any questions you may have about individual projects or about the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ani and let her talk a little bit about the Blueprint for Learning program.
Hello again, all the wonderful attendees who are spending your lunch hours with us and breakfast hours perhaps. Blueprint for Learning, as Ron had explained, is a collaboration between 3 family foundations located and operating here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. And the idea was to look across the organizations that encompass the Remake Learning Network: early childhood centers, centers of play, schools, school buildings and districts, higher education spaces, out of school time learning, museums and libraries, to wonder and imagine in deep partnership with architects and design experts around what it would look like to reimagine and repurpose spaces for learning. That meant the investment of $50,000 into 16 different organizations to do that reimagining work. And we were so lucky to be able to partner with Ron and Carrie and the amazing team at Reimagine America's Schools to not only do the work of reimagining and redesigning, but to host a free and public event at the beautiful Phipps Conservatory Botanical Gardens that worked with almost 200 different participants in a broader design thinking workshop across 2 days to really inspire and establish the kinds of learning environments that we were thinking about. And also then thinking about how each of these 16 organizations that were provided grants can now become hubs of professional learning as a resource to other organizations, either in their geographic area or the kind of content that they focus on, much as we see in beautiful spaces like Museum Lab and also places like the Lighthouse in the local Homewood Brushton neighborhood. So investing in more of these network nodes of support. Next slide, Carrie.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Little freeze up here, I think. There we go. So yeah, this is a little bit of the timeline of the project, and you see the Space Design Summit that Ani was talking about. Well, then I did want to, on the Space Design Summit, Ani, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the details of that day?
Absolutely. As with all of these wonderful Lush programs, we wanted to kick this off with a big bang and a big launch, and also provide an opportunity to really showcase and coach educators through the kind of thinking that we had in mind. And so we based a lot of the principles, the best practices, the strategies on not only the deep expertise of the Reimagine America's Schools team, but also a publication called Space to Learn. Next slide, Carrie.
I just wanted to make mention at the Space Design Summit, we were joined by Reimagine America Schools, some of their design team members, Judy Hoskins, John Pfluger, Lenny Scott Weber, and John Weeks. Again, we draw our teams from around the country, and these are some of the firms doing the best educational design around the nation. Then the next event was in September, the Design Institute. And during that event, that was the event that was held at the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. And it was led by the National Design Team members and joined by the Pittsburgh architects. It was really interesting about that is we were able to group 4 of the cohort members with 2 of the national team members, and they were able to work cooperatively, looking to put together a concept for their programs based on the $50,000 grant and what they had brought to the table. We were looking at trying to create a clear, concise, big idea, a vision for the reimagined space, look at the guiding principles for the design of the space, look at existing conditions, some design strategies to help be used in formalizing the design, and then clearly laying out what the next steps would be for each of the individual groups. So at that event, this is our national design team: Augie Battaglia, Ngozi Brown, Emily Sarnecki, Scott Krenner, myself, Phil Pinelli, Sarah Dursa, and Amy Yurko. Again, a team, a broad range of experience from around the country, able to work very cooperatively together and with the Pittsburgh architects to really help, I think, formulate some pretty good ideas. We also had started at this point recruiting the Pittsburgh area team, and we had a group of people in Pittsburgh, Patty Cully, Gwen Dacus, Bruce Nepper, and Alicia Volse to help us with that. So they were our on-the-ground recruitment team, helping us as we look to reach out and engage the Pittsburgh area architects who have become so important implementing these projects. So I want to talk a little bit about the blueprint for projects. The blueprint for learning projects individually, highlight a little bit some of those. We have some videos to show of some of those projects. So after the Design Institute, the Pittsburgh architects then started working directly with the cohort members, formalized the design, worked with a contractor partner, and started to look more deeply at costs. And as anybody who's been through a design process, there's always some surprises that come up. And we've been able, I think, very well as a team with the architects and with Remake Learning, work through those issues as they came up. They then in January were able to put together kind of final presentations that were reviewed with our Reimagine America Schools design team. And what you're going to see today is really a kind of a status report on where some of these projects are, the accomplishments, and some of the goals that were identified as we went through. So Ani, you want to start with North Elementary School?
Very happy to. North Elementary is a pre-K through 5 grade school that's located in Morgantown, West Virginia. They have conducted work like building a makerspace and being a model for hands-on instruction, and have even included a recycling program into their school and throughout their community. This was an opportunity to have an extremely teacher-driven project be part of the Blueprint experience.
We were fortunate to get BF4A Landscape Development involved in this project because of the nature of this outdoor garden. Having a design build approach from BF4A was really a great way to deliver this project. You see on the lower left a picture of what it looked like before and in progress photo from not too long ago across. But just some of the features that were started to pull together, organized pathways, creating learning stations. And that's something we'll see in a lot of the projects in identifying how a space can be used for multiple different activities and different learning activities at the same time, and defining those as we move through. The next project that we want to talk about is the Senator John Heinz History Center.
Yes, and they are part of the family of Smithsonian's and are Pennsylvania's largest history center. We're particularly excited about partnering with the History Center as not only a space to engage with teachers and learners around civics, but also because of the use of the potential of that space being located in the historic strip district of Pittsburgh, which is a hub very close to the downtown area.
So Desmoni Architects from Pittsburgh worked on that project. Some of the things that they started to look at was how a open space could be defined for different uses and be flexible for different uses. I think that the architect team reported back, on some lessons learned and how, as you start to enter a project with a limited budget, the need to rank the importance of the different ideas and prioritize those so that you can start to accomplish your highest priority with the funds that are available, and lower priority projects might get pushed off to a future phase just because of the resources available. They also indicated that with a short timeline in a project like this, how important it was to have a contractor who was familiar with the building and could hit the ground running and jump in and do the work. And they did find some issues that they had to deal with relative to infrastructure and just trying to bring water to a space and where it was located. So I think it was appreciate their being able to come in and help us out with some lessons learned that might be applicable as we move forward.
Yeah, the great plumbing epic of the History Center. The Center That Cares is an organization that has been serving the historic Hill District in the city of Pittsburgh for many, many years and is run by the Grayson family. For context, the Hill District has been historically disinvested by redlining, and Center That Cares provides critical academic, social, and psychological supports for younger children. They're also a family that runs the Jerron X. Grayson's family, which has already conducted a multi-million-dollar rehab of the Grayson Center, which serves older teens in the Hill District area.
We're going to hear a little bit later on our architects panel from Joshua Lee, who worked on this project, as well as Annie Rantatella. And we have a short video that Joshua and Annie put together, and we'd like to show that now for this project.
Hello, I'm Joshua Lee.
And I'm Annie Rantilla.
And we are the architects of the Center That Cares project. The Center That Cares is located in the heart of Pittsburgh's Hill District near the University of Pittsburgh and August Wilson's home. CARE's mission is to create a network of internal and external opportunities that offer step-by-step programming to prepare each child and young adult to achieve their life plans and goals in a safe, dependable, nurturing environment. Now entering their 20th year, CARES has supported more than 2,800 students and their families. During the academic year, CARES serves approximately 160 students from Monday through Thursday through their after-school enrichment and tutorial program. During the summer months, CARES offers a 7-week camp that serves more than 140 children. CARES also sponsors a summer basketball league, providing safe recreation for an additional 100 young people. The project began by a planning and dreaming session led by the Center of CARES and several architects. That resulted in a design concept for a repurposed home that serves as an activity center for CARES. Annie and I visited the site and determined that the home was in need of far more work than the grant could support. We quickly pivoted to another space in CARES Wesley Center.
The new site was in a large space in the basement of the Wesley Center that serves multiple community purposes. What was needed was a dedicated space appropriate for the needs of children and infused with interactive technology. Therefore, the most pressing need was to create an inviting and enclosed space with durable furniture that can accommodate a range of ages of children. Our scheme included new desks, chairs, soft seating, and updated fixtures. Storefront partitions to enclose the space, fresh, colorful paint, and a smartboard table.
We reached out to Franklin Interiors, an excellent local provider of furniture, technology, and architectural partitions, for assistance. Their experience with educational furniture was especially helpful and provided a detailed layout and arranged procurement for the furniture, as well as the glass partitions. They also agreed to donate several floor models at cost to the project, which helped us stretch our grant money. Painting and installation of the glass partitions began just as the pandemic hit back in March. Due to the disruptions, there still some touch-up work that needs to be done, but the center has been using the space for expanded services to children that rely on the center even more due to the remote modality of Pittsburgh Public Schools.
According to Shanora Johnson, CARE's Chief Operating Officer, the Center That Cares is excited for the new possibilities our reimagined and redesigned space will provide for our elementary programming. Thanks to the collaborative partnership with Remake Learning and funds provided by the Blueprint Learning Project, we are able to provide a cutting-edge space equipped with technology tools that will prepare our students and their families for the future workplace. The awesome synergy between the design team members and architects led to a more effective use of our existing space. Our students currently attending our Learning Hub couldn't be happier working in our redesigned space. The Center That Cares is also working with local artists to add graphic vinyl to the glass and artwork to the walls.
We want to say thank you again to the National Design Alliance's Reimagine America's Schools program, Remake Learning, the Center That Cares, and Franklin Interiors for their work on this incredibly impactful project for the children of Pittsburgh.
And that, I believe, is the Boys and Girls Clubs of Southwestern Pennsylvania. This is an organization that is near and dear to my heart, and one that is exemplary of the network effect in action. Having recently onboarded Dr. Lisa April Palmieri as their executive director, the Boys and Girls Club has, over the last 2 years, exponentially grown their impact and involvement with the Remake Learning Network. And we're really excited to see their Maker Lab grow with such a talented team.
The team of Buchard Horn was the Pittsburgh architect for this project. And we're going to show a video that they prepared summarizing the project. So Mark, if you want to try to put that one up. I don't know if it was harder to organize the 16 projects or get all the technology to work on the presentation here.
To stay relevant in a rapidly changing world, educational architecture has to evolve in response to emerging trends in teaching and learning. Buchard Horn Architects was pleased to partner with Remake Learning and Reimagine America's Schools as part of a national initiative to develop a new model for the design of 21st century learning spaces.
Hi, my name is Melissa Fuller. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Boys and Girls Clubs of Western Pennsylvania. In my role, I oversee 14 clubhouses throughout Allegheny County and Somerset. We have individual classrooms where we were doing art projects or computer, and we had a game room where kids would come and there's opportunities for them for pool or foosball or board games or building blocks. And we had a lot of emphasis. Our kids' interest had shifted, we noticed. And so their interest was STEM. They wanted to do STEM, they wanted to do art, and we were utilizing a classroom that was kind of doing both STEM and art. And essentially, we wanted to pull the two apart because at this clubhouse, it's very involved regarding STEM as well as art. Without the Remake Learning Project, we would not have been able to serve the kids the way that they're asking to be served. So in order to get the clubhouse up and ready to go for this project, we had to identify space, we had to identify square footage, we had to identify a project plan. What was that going to look like? The clubhouse was already functioning as a clubhouse, but we were shifting our focus. And with that came readjusting our space, working with architects to identify exactly where and how we could make the space work for our needs. What was our vision? What did we want this clubhouse to look like? And in order to do that, a team came together that was able to identify the space, work together to make sure that within the financial constraints of the project, we were able to do what we were setting out to do, which was create a maker space that was conducive for the learning that the children were identifying that they were interested in.
The Boys and Girls Club of Western is known for doing whatever it takes to help kids succeed. I guess to help youth succeed. Within that goal, the Estelle S. Campbell Boys and Girls Club, located in Lawrenceville, is really taking a turn to look at how our students and our youth within the area can really start succeeding in some of the technology-based careers and companies as they come into the area. So how do we get students ready to participate in tomorrow's work? In order to do that, we chose one of our bigger spaces and we gave the STEM and Maker space one of those bigger spaces and more well lit, just one of our focus spaces. So it went from a huge game room to now a fairly good sized game room and a fairly good sized maker space that allowed us to shift focus from that traditional just after school babysitting to more career development and creativity focused and problem solving based programs that we really want to shine and focus on as we move forward.
I'm a club kid, grew up at the Boys and Girls Club, been here all my life. It's the only job I've ever had, so I'm fully invested in what we do here. And so working with Christine, working with Nate, the people at Reimagining Schools, we were able to kind of think outside the box and how can we restructure our space to best fit the needs of our young people. Yeah, so working with Buchard architects allowed us to think of things that we couldn't even think of. You know, you don't know what you don't know. So we brought them in. Once they came in and saw our space, they said, okay, these are the things that you guys can do. These are the things we can make happen in this space. If there were no resource limits, if you could do anything, Buchard kind of opened up our minds to those kind of things. So we said, could we possibly throw a sink in so we can do more projects? They said, yeah, we'll go downstairs, check it out. So having them partner with us and let us know the technical things. Okay, this is what you can do. It's limitless what our young people are going to be able to do in the future because of this space, because of our partnership with Buchard and Reimagining America's Schools and Remake Learning.
Good presentations, Ani and Carrie. Thank you very much. That's just the first batch. We have two more presentations coming up through the program. So some really rich content. Before going into our panel, I guess we've been having some technical issues with a number of our attendees have ended up in the wrong Zoom meeting. So I know that Mark is our partner at CityAge is trying to sort that out. So if we have any little glitches, please forgive. So these are a representative of the architectural team that Reimagine America Schools put together. And looking at them, I think they look like a pretty bright and capable group. So we're going to talk a little bit about the work that we did and what lessons we can draw from that. Sarah Dirsa from KGD Architects at Mount Kisco, New York. Sarah, welcome. Joshua Lee, Carnegie Mellon School of Architecture, Pittsburgh. Welcome. Emily Zernecki from JCJ Architecture, Hartford, Connecticut. And you've met Kerry Leonard, Director of Architecture for Reimagine American Schools. Kerry wore two hats on this project. He was both the overall director, but also served on several of the design teams. So welcome. And had you known when we asked you to do this, what you know now, would you have actually said yes?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Tell us about your experience on Blueprint for Learning.
Who do you want to go first?
Well, Emily, let's hear from you.
Sure, I'll go first. I thought it was an amazing program. Seeing all of the different groups to come together was really great, all working together. I think the first day with the visioning programs were really exciting because they were mixing everybody up. You know, the representatives from each of the 16 groups were all kind of working on their space, but then got to do so many exercises together, and that was really exciting. I think that carried on through the rest of the program when we were split up into our smaller groups, each of us with our 4 groups. They weren't just focused on their space, but listening to the other teams talk about their spaces really provided a lot more ideas and some collaboration between them. And they started sharing phone numbers and emails and contacts because they knew something that could help the other group. And I thought that was a really great collaborative way for the program, whether it was intended or not. It really helped, I think, the whole process through.
Emily, you and Joshua were assigned to the Center That Cares project, and we just saw a presentation there. Talk a little bit about the experience with that project, since we just saw the preview in the previous segment.
Sure. Well, I'll start since we started, and then I guess Joshua, you can jump in after. Shanora was phenomenal to work with. She is so excited about anything that helps the students. It's all about the kids. And the common theme for all groups, but especially for them, was just providing this safe, exciting environment for students that inspired them, provided them opportunities that they would not normally have in some of their regular education or home life. And so learning from them and trying to find what could work for their spaces, really finding something that was technology based, but warm and inviting, flexible, working out those layouts for them was definitely a challenge. I know their first space that we were looking at ended up not working out because of the amount of work that had to occur. So I think what we started with and what Joshua was probably able to build on for the actual space they moved into.
Joshua?
Yeah, I had a really amazing experience with Shanora and Reverend Grayson and the team over there in general. In fact, it's actually led. I'm relatively new to Pittsburgh. I just got here a year and a half ago before the project had started, and my wife actually is in the education department at Pitt. So this was actually a fantastic opportunity for me personally, and then for us professionally, because now we've networked, and she has students from her education program at Pitt volunteering at the Center That Cares as well. So it's really been a fantastic opportunity for me to get engaged in the local community, and Reverend Grayson and Shanora are both Spitfires, and they're going to change the world for the better, no question about it. My only regret is that we weren't involved sooner, and that was just the fact that I didn't know about the thing earlier on. So, but I think overall we had a really great experience.
So you were operating with the idea it would be in one space, and then you changed to another space. How were you able to carry the objectives and the ideas that you originally were going to apply to the first space? Were you able to successfully bring that into the new space?
Yeah, it really was a huge leg up for us in terms of the rapid pivot that we had to make on the project. The initial building was a former home, and what they had planned to do with the space just wasn't, in terms of code compliance, wasn't possible. So we were able actually to take all the design ideas and just shift that into. Fortunately, just down the hill, they had in the Grayson Center, they had a large church basement area, which you saw in the images. And we were essentially able to take all of the lessons from the design intent and just apply that in the new space. Obviously, some of the requirements were different in terms of there was no enclosure for the space. So that was an important thing that we had to take on. But the basic ideas in terms of the furniture they wanted, the kind of technology that they wanted to use with the kids, that was all consistent. So it was a pretty seamless and rapid transformation of taking those ideas and applying them to the new space.
Sarah, we've been talking about the fact that this was, a tight budget for these projects. What did the tight budget do in terms of forcing creative solutions and different kinds of approaches than you might take if you had a more plentiful budget?
Right. So I think one thing that was really interesting about this project was how the scale shifted throughout the day. And I completely agree with Emily that everybody participated in everybody's project. All of the design teams or all the cohorts kind of worked together. The one client presenting the idea started with kind of in most cases, a small idea, renovate a library or renovate an after-school classroom. And through a series of questions throughout the day, that the scope really kind of expanded. Like, how do we connect other parts of the schools? And is this really where we want to be working? And how do we bring the neighborhood in and connect to other school districts? And really, expanded the scope and brought out all these other questions. And then at a certain point, we had to be like, okay, we've got $50,000. What is step one of this master plan? And so really the tight budget forced us to hone in on what were the most important ideas and the key factors and the things that to start with that could then be built upon in the future and wouldn't preclude having anything else happen going forward. So I think, in large part, the $50,000 maybe went towards, furniture or finishes or things to kind of kick off a project or create some kind of connection and show, make a visual impact to visitors to the space. But really, I think it was, creating step one of what could be multi-phase projects.
Good. Carrie, you had the unique perspective, both as the overall manager, but also hands-on with several of the projects. I said early on that there's a lot to learn from the work that has been done through Blueprint for Learning. What are some of the lessons that you carry away from this? What did we learn?
Well, a couple of things. I think what Emily and Joshua were talking about with the Center that Cares, having that strong concept clearly articulated at the beginning, it didn't make it made less of a difference as to which it was applied to, because having that strong programmatic element defined, it became much easier than take that and transition it to a different space. So I think that's one key takeaway. I think the engagement of a strong group of client cohort members, Sarah and I worked together in the team with 4, and we had a group of students from Riverview School District, the Veneer Project, which we'll see a little bit later. They were, it was their project, it was their idea, it was a student-run project. Another school district in our group, the Allegheny School District, wanted to do a student-centered space and with student-driven decision-making. And so in effect, the students that were in the group from Riverview were acting to represent the student voice in the Allegheny project. So by having a student voice in the project I thought was very important, but also having different voices, they could look at the projects and bring their own perspective. So that teamwork that was created very quickly between the 4 cohort members and the architects from Reimagine America Schools and from Pittsburgh area who were all working together. So there's something about the process, I think, that tells us. Sarah mentioned a couple of things, with the dollars being limited, you really want to focus on some pretty high-powered elements. There was an awful lot of discussion about creating a new identity, and a number of those that started with the entry. What do you see when you first walk in the space? So that becomes an area that you may want to focus a little bit of your attention. Also organizing, as these spaces start to be used for multiple learning activities, how do you define and organize different learning areas, learning nooks within a larger space that are better defined for specific areas? So we saw that through a lot of the projects, especially in some of the library projects where we're renovating a library space.
So, you watch the presentations and it looks like you're asking a lot from a very small space. You're putting a lot of demands on the space. How did you sort through the priorities and the appropriate way that you could, in some cases, activate some pretty tired old spaces?
I'll jump in. Do you want me to jump in?
Go ahead, Emily.
Like Sarah said, the spaces would start to grow, right? And you'd have to kind of focus them back. And we really started looking at, well, what's an impact? Paint. What can we do to brighten up spaces, especially spaces that were in darker areas? Maybe like we had a library that was in a basement. So when you come down the stairs, what do you see? Maybe it's adding some new light fixtures, some hanging light fixtures, new LEDs just to brighten up the space, and having a few pieces of furniture that really can be flexible, fun, some colorful patterns. So just picking a few items, whether it was those or even artwork, artwork became a really big element that we started talking through, was how do we brand these spaces, showing identity. And so we tried to just kind of focus them on things that could easily fall into that budget, be done simply. And again, then that phasing became a big part of a lot of the projects. What can they do down the road?
A lot of the teams had not worked with architects before. And I think most folks, when they think about architects, they think, well, you design space. Sure. But in what other ways, Sarah, did you feel like you were aiding and guiding your clients in these projects? What other role did you play besides just the person who designed space?
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time before we got into design at all, just doing some critical thinking and design thinking about the spaces, and really honing in on what was important to the client and what were they trying to accomplish. And in one case in Allegheny, was this even the right space to be focusing on to get their mission across and what they're trying to do? So our role, Carrie and I working together, and the other design teams with the other groups, was really to kind of question what was happening, and nothing was given, and not going in with any preconceived notions, and really kind of tearing that apart to see what was at the essence of what these groups were trying to do and what they were trying to accomplish, and then using design to kind of strengthen that and build that back. So it was really, and I think it was really excellent group conversations, and people drawing from their own experiences within their own organizations, and using their experiences to question other ones, partnerships between districts and organizations throughout the town, that really made these kind of stronger projects in the end, because they were really rethought and questioned.
Good. Joshua, what would you add to that?
Yeah, for us, it was really about, we felt a little bit like the wet blanket in the room when we came on the project, and had to tell them that, the doorways were not going to be code compliant, and the stairway that they had planned on using was too narrow. So for us, we were the architect coming in and telling them, sorry, you can't actually do this initially, but it did help them quickly then revision what they could do in an alternate space. So I think working with an architect, if you have not done that in the past, just general public's awareness of code, no one really knows that in detail other than architects and plan examiners. So I think that was a really important thing for us in terms of participation. Obviously, we would not want to spend money in a space that couldn't serve the purpose legally that it was intended to do. So for us, that was the kind of a strange perspective, not quite as like happy glowy, but I think it was an important thing for them to recognize that there are certain limitations with these spaces as well.
So I think as a final question, maybe a round robin where each of you can respond. One of the reasons that we've convened this forum today is to begin to spread the word, to begin to evangelize this idea that the way that these communities, agencies came together were unique and powerful. But what are the lessons that can be learned? So, what I'm imagining again in the post-pandemic world, that educators and civic leaders want to make a difference in their community and their schools. What can they learn from what happened with Blueprint for Learning? And I would just start by saying, I think that inclusion was really important. The diversity of voices that were engaged is really essential. Students, teachers, the unusual voices rather than just the usual voices. And there's power in that. And there's power in creating a sense of ownership about the vision that comes out of involving those folks. And so to me, that's one of the lessons that comes out of the Remake Learning project, Blueprint for Learning. Carrie, why don't you tee us up with
Yeah.
your
So, I think as architects, there is an expectation, and you mentioned it, that what we do is design buildings and space. But I think we're also very good at digging in and uncovering and connecting different ideas and thoughts, and then using that as the basis to then create go through a design process. So I call it immersion, where you really immerse yourself in the client's world, in the client's vision. And you need to understand that, because it does lead to a much better understanding of what needs to be done or what can or should be done. And any client needs to, I think, aim high to start with. And even though it may only be $50,000 or less that you have to work with, you need to articulate that vision and articulate what you really want to do. Because if you don't have that as a goal to work towards, then you may end up just wasting your money, as opposed to having the limited resources that are available start you down a path which really fulfills your goal. And so the architects helping you to understand and define that goal, immersing themselves in your world, I think is a key first step.
Thanks, Carrie. Emily, what about your thoughts?
Sure. I think, being open to other ideas. I think a lot of people may have come in with a set idea. Well, this is what I need to do. This is what I need. And although they knew they were going to be working with us and they would hear other ideas, I think there were some blinders on a little bit at the beginning. The visioning process, again, I think was very helpful. But then once we got into the real working, sketching ideas, throwing things back and forth, realizing that maybe some of their ideas needed to shift and change, and that the ultimate goal was still there, but that we had to re-envision some of what they were thinking initially. So like Joshua said with the wet blanket, we did start having to get into some of the ideas of, well, this is going to be very costly to take all of this down, and we may want to rethink this. It just kind of opened their eyes a little bit. So.
Yeah, I'll say if there's a big pot of money somewhere, the Center That Cares will spend it. There's no question. So they have a lot of needs. They're doing great work. So I think that there's no limit to what can be done through that organization. I will say too that one thing that I really took away is this the informal networks that were really required for us to pull this off. There were the informal networks that Reverend Grayson had, a handyman who could do some painting and some patching and repair. So that was sort of taken off of our to-do list of things to consider. And then Annie had had an existing relationship with someone over at Franklin Interiors, which was amazing, because they essentially not necessarily took the project over, but it was extremely helpful. We were able to take Shanora and Reverend Grayson over to their facilities, show them the furniture that they had seen in photographs, and touch and feel it, and they could kind of say, yeah, this is appropriate for our kids. The durability is good, and all that. And then we were able to, like we said in the video, convince Franklin Interiors to give us some of the furniture at cost, which was really, some of this furniture is quite expensive. So that was another really helpful piece to this whole thing, was just all of these informal networks that were underlying all of these projects, and able to quickly reach out to those and get the work done.
Sarah, what lessons do we learn?
Right, so similar to what you had said, Ron, about inclusion, I think it's really important to identify who are the project stakeholders, and what are their priorities, and how do those priorities diverge or conflict, and how do you create a space that can capture all of those needs, whether it's staff or students or parents or community members. The space really needs to do a lot for a lot of people. Even these small spaces, especially the small spaces, have to be flexible and do a whole bunch of things. So really, either speaking directly with the project stakeholders, or kind of hearing anecdotally what their priorities might be or interests, and figuring out how to incorporate those into the design is really important for success at the end, a space that, particularly the end users will all be really pleased with.
Great. Well, I want to add my thanks to Carrie's to you all and all of the architects that stepped up and donated their time and passion and energies to this project. To our audience, architects don't always give away their services. So, but in this case, tens of thousands of dollars in services were provided, and we're grateful to you and the other architects that participated. I think it's an important demonstration of the role and power of design and helping support the creation of appropriate spaces, and to take spaces that maybe one might not normally think of as being good learning space and really converting it into something pretty spectacular. So thank you all. We're now going to move on to the next segment, which is back to Ani Martinez and Carrie Leonard to present the next batch of projects. And then Ani and Carrie, after you, will have our funder panel. So we look forward to hearing about the next group of projects.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ron. And we have some very intriguing questions that are popping up as well that I will attend to when I'm off the mic again. And
Great.
Pittsburgh, yeah. So you want me to kick it off with Pittsburgh Public
Go
Schools?
ahead, Ani. Yep.
Absolutely. So Pittsburgh Public Schools, for those who are not from our area, is the largest school district on our half of the state. So you can imagine the number of buildings and team members and students that they're set up to serve. We were really compelled by the Brashear High School proposal because they had a relationship with the Remake Learning team as a previous grantee that were undergoing design process projects with their high school students. We were really excited about the idea of this massive media library space and how it could set up more multi-purpose, culturally relevant and student, librarian, educator-driven space to learn in a multi-modular way that Carrie will go into.
Great, thank you. And we had Mosher Studio worked on this project, and they had a good working relationship with the Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I think that really helped as they moved into the work. But on the left, you'll see a picture that's kind of the existing, the orange couch and the high bookshelves and the kind of the traditional lighting. It's a very typical dated library space that we see in a lot of schools. The high shelves blocking the view, and there was limited activity space. So on the bottom right, you can see the image of what is going to be there, and on the top right, a small picture of the work in progress recently. But to reorganize to contemporary media center uses and activities was a key part of this planning process. And it's the space, as they said, needed to catch up with the next generation. And I think you can see that even from the rendering to the existing picture. There's a dramatic change in how that space can be used, how that space is perceived. Adding low bookshelves so there's visual accessibility throughout the entire space. And then cultivating the library collection so that other types of medias and other uses of the library can fill in those spaces that formerly had been held by just bookshelves. They also talked about having the entry and doing something at the entry to the school to help signal that you were coming into the new space. So I think this is really a good example of how dated library spaces can start to be turned around and start to have multiple activity zones within the space, a much greater number of uses within a single space than what used to be accommodated there. Another library, Ani?
Another library, and I love working with libraries. They're really some of our most forerunners of change in space and use of space, and we've seen that for 10 years. The idea here was that they have the basement area allocated for and ready for change, and how might they use that to better connect both their education programs and the flow of their patrons. And this is one that is located in the Beaver County area, which is worth noting because they're undergoing lots of community change practices in their area as well.
And LGA Partners is the architect on this project. And I think you see in the picture in the bottom right, I believe that's a Carnegie Library originally. So it's a historic building, a lot of significance to the community. And as Ani mentioned, just taking that lower level space and being able to connect the various spaces down below, using the carpeting to do that, using a change in finishes, and then again, being able to identify distinct zones within each of those three spaces. So there's really a flow that's going to be created to that space. So we're looking forward to seeing how this one turns out. This is one of the projects. As you can imagine, all projects were affected a little bit by the pandemic, and this one has got off to a slow start because of that. So it's going to be great to see some of these projects roll in as they start getting completed.
The Human Services Center Corporation is really devoted to improving the quality of life for children, adults, and families in an area called the Mon Valley. They are focused on collaborative leadership, acting as a bridge between human service organizations and those who develop the policies around funding, as well as monitoring community needs and providing innovative strategies. This one is a great example of being very strategically placed in a geographic area that can serve a greater good and has already done some of that network hub support for like-minded organizations.
And you see the term non-institutional. They wanted this space to be unlike any other space where the students would spend their time. They really wanted this to feel like a different space. It's a 660 square foot classroom that is being asked to do an awful lot. So how, in looking at the design solution, the idea that using the perimeter to create these learning spaces, learning areas, keeping the open of the center of the space open, to allow flexibility for different types of furniture to be brought out for smaller group or larger group activities, creating focal points like a little stage type area. These are all pieces of this that are going to come together. But again, the demand to put on a 660 square foot space is quite a bit. The Pittsburgh architect for this project is Fafman and Associates, and again, one that has been delayed a little bit because of the pandemic, but hoping to see how this all turns out.
Allegheny Valley School District is being championed by a longtime network member, Brett Cieslak, who is part of several of the network's learning communities and professional development communities. We are interested in Allegheny Valley School District not only because it is on the Rachel Carson family homestead, but also because they had a large space that they were devoted to working hand in hand with their students to repurpose as it would serve both district needs as well as be a quote unquote third space for the teens that attend the school.
And this is a project that Sarah and I had the opportunity to work with them on in the charrette. This is where originally the thinking might be to do something with a library, and we started to change the focus to the underused conference room called the Rachel Carson Conference Room. And that this was the space that really could become a classroom of the future. And this was not only about just a space and a project, it was about how they could engage students in this process to make it a student-centered space and to start looking at ownership within the building by students of the design that would be happening. So they were going through really a change management process, with just starting with one initial space and looking at how this might be leveraged into the library and other spaces that happen to be across the hall from the cafeteria. So we were able to try to design some connections across the hall and into other areas so that it starts to spread from just one room to an entire building and then ultimately to an entire district. And VEBH Architects is the architect on that project.
Providence Connections serves 400 local Northside families through childcare services, before and after school care, family support, parent and adult education, and in-home visitation and family counseling. They're one of the organizations that we're most focused on the earliest of our early learners.
So this project, IKM Architects is the architect for the project. Originally, this was conceived of as a greenhouse addition to an existing lab so they had a connection to the outdoors. This is one where the cost of that greenhouse space on the grade level, retaining walls and utility work that would have been done made that solution cost prohibitive. IKM Architects was able to work with a client, take those same ideas, and a question architects always get asked is, wasn't this building, somebody thought the building was designed for another floor to be built on top? Well, this building actually was, which is a rare occurrence to find that to actually be true. So they could move the space up to the rooftop. It gave it a much more secure and protected environment in the neighborhood, got the students outdoors, and the structural design was already there for that to happen. And this is conceived of as a modular type addition, so that as funds become available, this could actually be expanded and pushed out and the components reused and just add a little bit more of the deck area. So a great idea here that hopefully is going to come to fruition in the coming days.
Wheeling Country Day is one of our West Virginia members of the cohort. They're a nonprofit independent school that was established in 1929 and focuses on preschool through 5th grade. We're very interested in looking at Wheeling Country Day as not only an innovative practice school, but one that was set up very much like a campus and a community.
AM Architecture is the architect for the project. We're going to see a video from them in just a second. I thought one thing interesting about the project is there was a nice indoor-outdoor connection between work in the library and an outdoor space. That outdoor space is still to come, but you'll hear a little bit about that. As this space got changed from the traditional library, obviously that creates some issues that can happen in an existing school and hanging on to existing spaces. They also were able to, with the advancement changes to the space, adapt it and use it as another learning environment during this COVID issue, so that it was able to be created as an extra learning environment. So it's already championing some of the flexibility ideas that are built into it. So with that, Mark, can we show the Wheeling Country Day school video?
Just over 1 year ago, Wheeling Country Day School, along with 15 other schools and community organizations around the greater Pittsburgh area, were awarded a $50,000 Blueprint for Learning grant from Remake Learning and the Claude Worthington Bentham Foundation. After a 3-day design charrette, local architect Adam Mull was added to the team, which proved to be a crucial step thanks to his intimate knowledge of the school needs, as well as an understanding of the space and the potential therein.
My name is Adam Mull. I'm principal of AM Architecture here in Wheeling, where Wheeling Country Day School is. I guess really my background would just be that, I have two daughters at the school and have been involved with campus projects from time to time. And this was an important one. In my mind, when I go on campus, I'm always thinking about, hey, this space could be enhanced if we did this, or I get feedback from my kids. So yeah, obviously the intimacy of being on campus with 2 kids gives me an advantage versus somebody who, another architect that might just be coming in out of nowhere.
Like any major remodeling project, last-minute glitches and budgetary considerations often force team members to think and solve problems on the fly, something at the heart of WCDS, as well as the Remake Learning and the entire Blueprint experience.
Any design project, you're throwing darts a bit because you haven't done it before. So you can take small steps and kind of build that budget, build our program, but until we really get into it a little bit further, we don't know where that budget's going to hit. And but we've all pulled together and we've made good decisions. And the best part is we've got the interior space done and it's usable. But now the goal of the entire campus is to be used outside as much as possible for the foreseeable future. And I would imagine that would be ongoing even once we get through COVID. So shifting the design of that exterior shade to something that can handle the weather in the winter. And so obviously we had to go back to the engineers and get some things redesigned. That takes time. So that was another thing. We were losing weeks through that process. And we're now to the point where we're in the value engineering to kind of rein it in a little bit so that it can get built in the budget.
So, while the COVID-19 pandemic forced most schools around the country to reimagine what in-person learning would look like moving forward, reallocation of space and socially distanced, preferably outdoor education became paramount. Thankfully, this project had already forced the reimagining of physical spaces, so reimagining the reimagining wasn't much a task at all.
Where I think it really kind of took off is bringing your staff together to really think about what it could be. And I think that's what you guys do at the school the best. Before COVID and when we started working on this project, we were pretty focused on this project. And then with COVID, you guys really didn't miss a beat, which was tremendous. And it was a big help as a parent of two kids there that they didn't feel the effects as I think other schools did. And what we realized is that, yeah, we can look at one space, we can look at this small space and we can design it well. But we just stepped back immediately and said, okay, spread out. Where can we put children? How do we space people out? And this project became part of that. But the project that we were working on kind of became this big macro view of the campus. And the Reimagine learning space just became part of that.
Since WCDS reopened its campus, the Blueprint project has continued, all while the revamped space has been utilized as a new classroom. With additional outdoor improvements, including an all-weather shade structure scheduled for the spring, this project has become a beacon of possibility in the face of overwhelming odds.
It's certainly kind of manifested into something beyond what I was originally kind of thinking in my head what it might be. I think some of the things that we were learning from working on this project, we were able to kind of put in place all across the campus. So some of those things that we were learning, we could implement. And one of the big benefits is, of course, our shade sail supplier came up with 2 large tents that are there today and have been used all summer. So, I think some of the things that really evolved with it is we were able to pull in people to help, which we've done, and it managed well. And from one contractor to another contractor kind of led to another contractor, and we all kind of pitched in. So I think we all learned that if we just kind of put ourselves out there, other professionals, other groups are going to kind of step up and help.
Revamping a decades-old elementary library into an indoor-outdoor blended learning space sounds a lot like responses to challenges posed throughout 2020. It turns out the forward-thinking nature of projects supported by Remake Learning, the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, the National Design Alliance, and Reimagining America's Schools seems nothing short of premonitory as we continue fighting the good fight for safety and innovation on our campus and beyond. From everyone here at Wheeling Country Day School, thank you.
I congratulate you, Luke, and the whole school on working on this project and, of course, being awarded the grant, in the first place. So I think we're only going to see those benefits just kind of grow as we finish this up and as things return to normal a little bit.
We're going to listen to a conversation with the funders of this extraordinary project. Greg Baer from Grable Foundation, Jim DeNova from Benedum, and Kumar Garg, who is the funder through Schmidt Futures of Reimagine America Schools. So Kumar, we appreciate your support in helping us do this important work. So these are the organizations and the individuals that had the vision and the resources that made the stories that you're now hearing a reality. I think it's important to understand that philanthropy plays a very important role in helping create vision in community and in schools. So we're eager to hear from you all. Kumar has agreed to kind of guide the conversation. So well, let's take it away. And Kumar, the next time you see my face, it'll mean that your time is up. So you have about 30 minutes.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be joining this wonderful conversation. I would rather have it in person because anytime Greg and I get together, good things happen. And I'm super appreciative for everyone for all the incredible work that's happening. I know 2020 is very different than what any of us imagined, and the fact that folks have really stepped up and driving work in their communities is just really impressive. So I want to congratulate everybody. So I think the goal of this conversation is really to start to unpack both what were some of the ideas that led to this project, but also where it can go into the future. And we have some of the folks who thought this idea up, namely Greg Baer and Jim DeNova. And so I'd be curious, maybe Greg and then Jim, if you just want to sort of unpack a little bit on a little bit of the origin story for what caused this project to come about. And obviously it was conceived presumably before the pandemic. So what were some of the initial urges that sort of brought it about and why you sort of conceived of it? And then we can sort of start to bring it towards the present. So
thank you, Kumar, and hello to you. So you're right. I mean, our thinking, we have to put our heads back completely pre-pandemic. And in many ways, we have to put ourselves back nearly 15 years ago, because this project, the Blueprint Project, sits in the context of a region in southwestern Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia that's been wrestling for nearly 15 years with what is it to advance relevant, engaging, and equitable learning as young people navigate social and technological change, right? So the investment in capital spaces takes place in the context while we're also investing in peer learning and professional development and support for teachers, small catalytic grants that allow a teacher maybe to work with a technologist in a new way, or a designer to work with a librarian, all sorts of investment in communications and documentation about how we connect timeless learning with new ways of learning. So in that context, one of the many lessons learned is from a pioneer of someone who has remade learning for half a century, and that's Bill Strickland. If you're familiar with Bill Strickland and his work at the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild here in Pittsburgh, something about which Harvard Business School's written, I think, at least 3 case studies, he says a lot of quotable things, one of which is environment drives behavior. And it's something that we have witnessed time and again in this region and elsewhere about how space, when designed with the user or the learner right at the center, can then drive the instruction that happens in that space, the learning that happens in that space, the community collaboration that happens in that space. And so it's in that context of environment driving behavior that the Benedum Foundation, the Grable Foundation, and our colleagues at the Hillman Family Foundations came together to say, how do we respond to the demand and appetite in this community to rebuild spaces in existing schools, museums, libraries, and other sites of learning in a way that matches where learning is going? Jim, you want to unmute yourself and add to that story?
Yeah, I would. Jim, how would you sort of add to, like, both for you personally, obviously for the foundation, how you sort of were approaching this as an area of interest?
I would say the springboard for me is Greg's reference to environment shapes behavior. So for us at the Benedum Foundation, we're very interested in student-centered learning, particularly students who learn in alternative methods, alternative fashions. So when you think about how environment shapes creativity, how it influences learning, we can look to the workplaces like Google, where you're seeing a total transformation of the environment, all driven towards stimulating creativity. So we want to know how different innovations in environmental design can stimulate learning, particularly for students who learn in alternative fashions. I'd like to loop back to this last presentation on Wheeling Country Day. Now, Wheeling Country Day School, it wasn't referenced in the video, but to add to their history and tradition, they operate a dyslexia clinic. They're nationally recognized for their work in teaching other teachers how to work with students who have dyslexia. They've taken it a step further and created something called the Center for Multisensory Learning. And this center has been a focal point for universities like Carnegie Mellon University, who are working with Wheeling Country Day to see how light, texture, color, furniture, all of those robotics, how they really influence those students who are on everything from the autism spectrum to dyslexia, how they respond to different kind of environmental stimuli. So this is really the centerpiece of what we want to invest in and to figure out how this experiment in architectural design can add to that body of knowledge and be shared with other schools about how we can create a stimulating learning environment for students who learn in a variety of ways.
You know, yeah,
Sorry, I don't mean to take over your role, but
no, please.
So Jim's last, so the peer learning is important, right? We could have, as a collection of funders, funded 1 or 2, but there are 16, which creates a cluster of in and out of school spaces, early childhood through college, really, to reimagine and learn together and sharing that learning together, but then investing in the documentation as we're witnessing here today, so that it spreads beyond those 16 places in our region and also across the country and beyond. And that collective opportunity was also a reason that we opted to work together in the way that we did in support of Blueprint for Learning.
And that's the gift of Remake Learning Network. That's the vehicle for that kind of peer learning and sharing and showcasing.
You know, I'll just sort of put my priors on the table. You know, so I served in the Obama Office of Science and Tech Policy, have been in this space and in cahoots with Greg for some amount of time. And I will +1 this idea that being really intentional about not just what an idea is, but really helping it grow by building community around it and letting people learn, I think is a really, people sometimes underinvest in that, and that's what really stays. But you know, 2 things at least jump out to me about investing in spaces that I think is really, I think you're onto something powerful and important even before we get to the sort of COVID context. I think one is that I think that when I was in the government, you know, school buildings, school facilities, you know, this sort of thing, I can imagine, you know, in my 8 years working for the president, 0 meetings on it. As in, you know, people will have hundreds of meetings about curriculum, lots of meetings about teachers. And it's this, there's a bunch of stuff on the capital side that is treated as just like a given. And one, I think, you know, anytime something is totally missing from the picture, there's probably a large share of underutilized value that if you actually focused on it and said, how does this integrate, you can get. The other part that actually just jumps out to me is just when I have looked at other areas, you know, we used to invest in science and sort of the science of science, like what leads to collaboration. You know, I remember reading this research report about BioX, which is like a, you know, so these sort of new integrated research facilities. And what they found was where you put faculty members, like literally what floor you put them on, matters for how many joint papers they publish. And, you know, especially when they're in not related fields. So basically what they find is, you know, in BioX, they put people from a whole range of disciplines on the same floor. In the next 3 years, their research productivity actually drops because they're not next to the people they usually work with. Yeah. And then after that, it's like this big upward climb because, you know, it's like very natural. Like you work with the people you bump into, and people bump into people who are next to them physically. And I think like people have actually found this very surprising because, you know, these are academics who are doing top shelf work. Who they work with is clearly engineered, you know, like based on where the best next set of research ideas. And yet you have these sort of Xerox PARC like settings where you can just let, you know, interesting new ideas come from putting people together. And just like I think the science community has not thought enough about, well, how do you structure science is not just a question of how do you design the next proposal. It can actually be literally where you physically put the scientists next to each other. You know, this might be an area where the education community is not spending enough of its time thinking about how space can help feed all its other goals. And so I just thought this was a powerful area, not that we have all the answers. So I'll just sort of put why some of the priors, at least that jumped out to me as to why this is interesting. Greg.
I appreciate everything you said, particularly that phrase bump up, right? Because it's why we are privileged to support the Remake Learning Network, where people are bumping up against each other, because that's where the sparks and the ideas and the catalyst happens. It happens in the production of publications and things like you described. And it happens in physical spaces. And someone in the chat I noticed noted the work of Reggio Emilia, but right? That's also a phenomenal example. It's not just about the learner, and it's not just about the adult, as critical as those things are, but it's also the interaction with the environment and the mindset in the environment. And the design of the physical space matters so much to both of those things.
And, so just to sort of now take it forward, and obviously, part of our sort of intersection with this was the work that you guys are doing with sort of Reimagine America's schools and them sort of bringing, sort of bridging between educators, architects, folks with design, folks who are sort of bridging across these. I would just be sort of curious, where you thought the project would be now compared to when you started, both on the obviously COVID is the big difference, but also just in sort of what your priors were going in versus things that have jumped out to you. I'd be curious, Jim, why don't we start with you on just, what's surprising to you about where we are in the project compared to what you thought when you started it?
Well, it's a little early in the process to say how this is going to land, but I think one of the positive aspects, if there's any silver lining to COVID, it's the fact that thinkers and educators and planners are starting to experiment with a certain drive or courage that they may not have in traditional times. So if I can go back to this notion of student-centered learning, I think there's much more attention now to saying, how can we wrap the whole educational experience around the student rather than figuring out how to force students into a defined structure, so that when we pay attention to what those very subtle nuances are of very diverse student bodies, I think we can design a better learning environment that I hope will be a permanent part of the learning environment. I hope we don't revert. So that's why we have to watch ourselves this year. And architects do this well. Architects are the aesthetic designers who tease out intent, tease out the need, tease out the perceptions that and the messaging that should go into the design. And I think that fits very well when you're working with very specific and unique student populations. Tease out what those students need and how they respond to environmental stimuli. That's what I'm hoping to see by the end of the next year. And I'm optimistic.
Greg, what jumped out to you compared to when things started?
Yeah, one, in the category of noticing and wondering, one of the things that we've noticed, because we're situated here in southwestern Pennsylvania and we know something about these 16 organizations, if you look at Wheeling Country Day, which we just saw a moment ago, or the Boys and Girls Club articulated earlier, these are organizations that were able to respond fairly deftly and quickly to a remarkably changed environment. And it's really no surprise, because they made a decision about wanting to reinvent a space. And that didn't just happen overnight. It was years of investment in culture, and then all of the things that go related into building of the culture of an organization and a building and a space. And that's true of school districts and others in our region who, for example, didn't miss a day of instruction in the springtime. Whereas we have other schools that honestly are still struggling. And it's a reminder of, quite frankly, the unsexy year in, year out work of culture building and the lots and lots and lots of little bets that administrators and teachers and librarians and youth workers and others are making year in, year out, day in, day out, to get to a place where they're able to respond to something as horrific as a pandemic or racism, to say nothing of navigating the future in a post-pandemic learning environment.
One thing that I think people are sometimes over-conclusive on this and sometimes under, is just this question of what will be the new reality as kids start to come back to school. Kind because obviously everyone, educators, parents, students are all going through like a format of learning in a lot of spaces that's totally different than what they've done before. The question is like, what are you coming back to? And it sort of usually breaks down into two questions. One is inevitably there's going to have to be physical upgrades to buildings for safety and other reasons. And the second one is, students are going to be a wide variation around learning loss and how do we sort of compensate. I'd be curious, what are ways that thinking about these sort of investments around space can actually help, actually be an answer to these sort of challenges, both around safety, but also learning loss and actually not just the deficit model, but actually thinking about how do we actually help students kind of really thrive. And I'd be curious how at least not that we have any answers because we're in the midst of this thing, but how you're sort of at least starting to wrap your head around what we're facing.
I think we're going to end up with a learning environment that's not just in school and in home, but a whole mix of different configurations. And I want to go back to Wheeling, for example. The minute the pandemic hit, their director began looking at small group learning opportunities in adjacent properties. They're on the border of one of the country's largest privately managed municipal parks. So moving groups of students into satellites surrounding the school was one way to look at a hybrid model that's not just part in school, part at home, but new configurations. And there is a lot of movement around learning pods, hubs, micro schools, however you want to describe it. I think when it comes to physical space, we're going to come out of this with a whole new configuration that looks like satellite constellations or a campus model of some kind.
Yeah, I think what's happening in these spaces now and what happened just prior to life shutting down as we knew it in mid-March are really signals about what's possible as we look ahead. None of us can predict that, but our colleagues at KnowledgeWorks talk often about signals in our life about what's possible in a future orientation. And I think when we think about the future, we think about it in three ways. One, there are some things that are familiar and comfortable about what was, or some things that were timeless, like the role of caring adults that we want to keep, right? There's a lot that was wrong. We're not going to keep those parts. But there's some things about comfort and familiarity that we want to keep. Two, there's some remarkable innovations to which Jim was just speaking a moment ago that we want to preserve. And during a presentation last week, I had a privilege to hear Linda Darling-Hammond talk through 10 or so different things that are happening in schools, like just the amount of time that educators have or how we're using technology enhanced learning in new ways. There are things about these 10, 12, whatever months it ends up being that we are going to want to preserve. And then there's work that we need to do now to imagine things into being that aren't yet there. And it might be space, but it might be the humans in those spaces. And I'll give you one concrete example that we've thought through in our work with Remake Learning and published in a piece called Remaking Tomorrow. 10 years ago, it was very rare, if not absent, that there were directors of instructional innovation in school buildings or other sites of learning. In our region and elsewhere, there are now directors of instructional innovation in all sorts of educational service agencies, school districts, and the like. They might call it something slightly different, but it's a new position. Well, what if there were directors of relationships in school buildings? People who could work in these spaces, see how kids are lit up in new ways and understand their passions and interests differently and say, how can I help build the social capital of this kid who's clearly lit up by coding or is clearly lit up by maker-centered learning? And what are the things that I can do to help build his or her networks as we look ahead and really become a learning navigator? What if there were positions in school districts focused on that? That would be extraordinary. So there are things that we are going to have to imagine into being, and we need to start to do that work right now.
So as we start to close out, I guess one big thing that's happened in addition to COVID is there just was a big election. I think, and there
really? I
is.
missed that. Is that going on?
And so, you know, and I think it creates the opportunity for people to start to think about the policy response. You know, and obviously, you know, education is fundamentally local, but I think there's a role that the federal government and states and others can play. Are there things that you would love, you know, obviously this project is early, but that you would love sort of policymakers to be thinking about as they start to approach questions around how they can be designing policies so they're most supportive to the situation we're in, but also this world that we're going into? Jim, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, you know, student-centered learning, student-centered assessment, self-paced learning, all of the things that revolve around how kids learn. And are there policy waivers? Are there new policies that can adjust to better ways of motivating students forward? And again, COVID is really enabling a lot of educators to start experimenting now. Let's make sure we capture the lessons learned from this experiment in a crisis, this crucible, and see which ones really affect policies on a permanent basis so the reforms can stick. And that's both federal, state, and local. Local school boards have a lot more latitude than they may imagine that they have. So watch these experiments and see where the policy implications fall. That'd be my suggestion.
I made light of the election, and I did, you know, in part I didn't mean to. In part, we're just exhausted here, living in a swing part.
Oh my, I can only imagine.
Right, but it's interesting, right here in southwestern Pennsylvania, there's a distinct blue part and a very large red part. And I mention that because the opportunity at a state government or federal government level is to identify those things that really connect the red and blue areas. And it's more complicated than that, right? I don't mean to just say there are red and blue areas, but there is a lot of bridging and bonding that needs to happen. And so we know, for example, from the Center for Rural Education here in Pennsylvania, that there's a deep desire and interest in counseling in schools. That's certainly true in our urban areas too. How can we address that? We know that there's extensive food insecurity across southwestern Pennsylvania and other parts of this country. How can we address the medical, health, and otherwise needs of schools in our communities? And in Pennsylvania, our state government over the past number of years has invested in something called PA Smart Grants. These grants in part have supported STEM-focused learning ecosystems throughout the state in urban and rural areas, often connecting urban and rural, so that there really is reciprocal learning between rural educators and urban educators. That's the sort of work, one, that's important and it's needed, but two, it might really lead to some better civic cohesion, at least as it relates to education and learning in communities like ours and all across America.
Well, why don't we just close out with just, you know, if you have any, we have all these great folks listening, if you have any sort of call to action around ways folks, if they are interested in what they've heard, can either learn more or try to take some of this work into their own bodies of work. Greg, why don't we start with you and I'll end with Jim.
Yeah, so our colleagues on the team at Remake Learning have done extraordinary work documenting the work of Remake Learning and Blueprint for Learning over the years, using social media, using publications, using articles and video and the like. And so at remakelearning.org, you'll find all sorts of openly sourced information, toolkits, playbooks, and publications. So there's a lot of great resource material there. And then two, I believe deeply, and Jim, I bet you share the sensibility. I don't think change happens in great, big, sweeping, grand moments. Quite frankly, it doesn't even happen in $50,000 grant projects. I know those are modest in the world of building and architecture and so forth, but those are actually large grants in the scheme of things. The work of Remake Learning as it relates to funding has really been accomplished through lots and lots of small bets. $2,500 grants, $5,000 grants, $10,000 grants that allowed a university and a school to work together in a new way, to have a library and social workers work in new ways, for technologists and teachers to work in new ways. I think it's finding those small bets and continuously investing in those small opportunities that actually leads to remarkable change.
I would reiterate that, and I too am a believer that innovation starts on the ground, and let's make the best use we can of the networks for sharing. And then you start a movement. It's classic community organizing in many ways in the learning environment. Remake Learning is one of the best vehicles. And to your audience, if there are questions, suggestions, other networks nationally or internationally, contact Remake Learning, and we'll just continue to broaden that conversation and that sharing.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank both of you for this great panel, and Ron for hosting this great meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich discussion. Kumar, thank you so much.
Happy to do it.
And take care of things in Washington for us.
Okay.
So we're going to now turn to our last group of presentations, back to Ani and Carrie to bring us home.
Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you, Kumar and Greg and Jim. It's always wonderful to see you in conversation. And so we're going to jump right back in. As Greg had mentioned, we've been making these small investments in organizations for almost 15 years. Attack Theater is a wonderful example of an organization thinking in ingenious ways around the use of technology as it relates to the smallest dancers in their company, who are also, as coincidence would have it, are members of our deaf and hard of hearing community. We knew that bringing them into this cohort would provide very interesting ideas. Carrie?
Thank you, Ani. So Burkhard Horn, also the architect on this project. And interestingly, when this whole project started, I think I recall saying that wasn't sure where, what was going to go wrong, but something was going to go wrong with one or two projects. And we've dealt with those, I think, all very well. But Attack Theater was looking for a home, and they thought they had a lease signed for a facility, which was part of the charrette work that was done. That lease fell through, but they found a new home, and so this project is back on track. But in identifying and creating a new home, because this had really been an itinerant program before that, some things that key entry and identity became key factors that were discussed during the planning. So we're looking forward to seeing those in their new project. I will, one other kind of side note on Attack Theater. In the charrette at the end of the day, at the end of our session, they got up and made us all engage in a dance exercise. And so after 2.5 days of working together, I don't know if I hadn't been a little sleep deprived, if I would have joined so readily, but it was part of that immersive experience to really understand what they do. And it was very enjoyable and very helpful, though, just in again, getting to know your client better.
Dancing together, what an example of community building practices. The Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf is one of the state's leading agencies that serves deaf and hard of hearing students, and also was a fascinating endeavor as we think about targeted universalism and how those design principles make space better for all of our learners and all of our educators. Carrie will talk you through about what it means to create a design for a deaf safe space.
Yeah. So Bolin Chalinsky Jackson is the architect for this project. I think Jim was mentioning it in the last panel when he talked about creating that inclusive environment for specialized population needs, but it really highlights what we should be thinking about every day in every design for every student. To really rethink about design, when addressing the needs of this population, it really does drive home that need to deeply consider who we are designing for, and to bring that into every bit of work that we do, and an understanding, an empathy really for working with who are the true clients in any of these projects, which are the students and the users of the space.
Mm-hmm. Hope Academy is situated in a historic, beautiful church in our East End neighborhood, a thriving hub and also a space of complications around gentrification and the intermixing of media, of people and their demographics. Hope Academy runs the Suzuki Orchestra and music program, as well as several arts and social emotional learning programming. They were very invested in what it means to be welcomed into their space, and also thinking about the transition spaces where parents, families, and siblings might wait while children are practicing their string instruments.
And obviously, this is a facility that was deeply affected by the pandemic. But that idea, that original idea of this transition space, that central space, and Stephanie Daines, the architect who worked on that, really creating a concept of utilizing that space when parents and students are waiting for their class or waiting for their students in the class, to be able to really not be just sitting down, but actually to be actively engaged and expanding their view of what goes on in the space by utilizing that in-between space in the design.
The Bible Center Church is a center of faith that has been making deep real estate investments in the Homewood area of the city of Pittsburgh. They run everything from an urban farm to their own small business and cafe. We were working with the Bible Center Church to look at what their brand new pre-K facilities might look like.
So Studio Volse, the architect on the project, and I think as we look at some of the existing conditions in the upper right and the design for a new mural that'll lay out in that space, and some of the interactive design elements that'll be part of that solution. And a challenge that faced this right off the bat was exactly who owned that strip of land, and could they use that strip of land. And amazingly, a great initiative. They were able to resolve that very quickly. I was shocked at how quickly they were able to resolve and get documented use of that space. But you can see what kind of an exciting space this will be, and the type of interactive elements to create that kind of indoor-outdoor type environment that is so important.
It's great to see that repetition of those informal learning networks coming into play so that we can resolve some of these, what might otherwise be timely issues. Riverview School District is one of the ones that we all love to talk about. The proposal itself, the design sessions, every step of the way was completely reimagined and led by a team of 3 amazing teenagers who attend the Riverview District. They had a noticing around the use of space and some of the inequities that they noticed among their school buildings, and they took it into their own hands to really do something about it. Because of their inspirational work with Blueprint for Learning, their district has invested an additional $100,000 worth of funds into the reimagining of the Werner Elementary School building.
So VEBH Architects completed this project, and as Ani mentioned, just working with these students was really amazing. And how you can see on the bottom left a very traditional kind of space that you would find in a library, and that's the view into this area that was renovated. And you'll see in the upper left, that's the view out. So you can just even the change in the amount of glass, the going away from the dark wood to the lighter colors, having a hard surface floor in here so that wet and messy projects could be done. Bottom right, you can see the white marker board surfaces that not only cover up some storage, but are movable, but also allow that surface to be used to get ideas and thoughts down. And just the little bit of use of colored glass. I think in definition, in the original design, they would have liked to have had a secret entrance to this library. Secret entrances, maybe a tough one from a code point of view, but I think how VEBH just took a little bit of the colored glass and added a little sense of intrigue to the entry to try to help bridge that concept into reality.
And as we reach our final showcase, the campus laboratory School at Carlow University, I want to take a moment to thank Lisa Johns, who unfortunately could not be here with us, from the Hillman Foundation, and her deep investments in early childhood education, as well as pre-service learning, which is what the Carlow campus truly exemplifies.
So in this project, which was completed by Buchart Horn, we're looking at the ideas of a bright and welcoming modern touches to this facility, and creating those multiple centers of activity for reading, storytelling, gaming, writing, and tinkering. Some really great ideas. And so we're going to roll a video on this last of the 16 projects.
To stay relevant in a rapidly changing world, educational architecture has to evolve in response to emerging trends in teaching and learning. Buchart Horn Architects was pleased to partner with Remake Learning and Reimagine America's Schools as part of a national initiative to develop a new model for the design of 21st century learning spaces.
My name is Jessica Webster, and I am the head of school for Campus Laboratory School. And so I oversee and supervise and support the teaching and learning of students here, K through 8. The Campus Laboratory School is situated on the campus of Carlow University. We are a laboratory school, which means that students from the education department are often in the building as practicum students, doing observations and student teaching. We partner with the university to share spaces and for opportunities for our students that they normally wouldn't get in a traditional school setting. So to begin with, the space felt dark. We were blocking some of our best features, which would be the stained glass windows. Around us, they were blocked by bookcases and inaccessible. The seating was not comfortable for students. It was difficult to find materials in the space. There were tons of books, but difficult to locate what you needed, and not conducive to students being able to do instructional activities in the space or to hang out with friends to do work, projects, or anything of that nature. I think the best part was working with our architectural team, which is Buchart Horn. Having their knowledge of what educational spaces could look like and understanding how all the different pieces work together to design an overall aesthetic was extremely important to us. They were also really, it was really beneficial how they also helped us with figuring out furniture, layout, and just making sure that the project stayed on time, was on schedule. Those are all extremely important elements, and they were very responsive to our questions and our needs as we went along. And then it also just gives us a hub that becomes like our community center. So this is a place that faculty can gather for meetings that's going to be comfortable for everybody, and also celebrations. And so that's how we view this space, as really like the hub of the school. It represents the heartbeat of who we are and really reflects our mission.
Great people at Remake Learning and helping to put together these presentations, and all of the architects who were involved from Reimagine America Schools, from the Pittsburgh area. It was an incredible team effort, and we really have just scratched the surface on telling these stories. There's a lot more to be studied and a lot more to be learned from this, but we look forward to continuing to share the stories. Ron?
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for your work today and putting together this presentation, but also for your excessive hours over the last 2 years in guiding this program. So that's our program today. We have a few minutes I'm going to close out, but I think a couple of closing comments. One, Ani and Carrie have given you their contact information for those of you who are interested in getting more information on one or more of the projects. I am sending out my contact information to all of you, so that if you want to reach out to me or read more about Reimagine Schools, We'll be posting this forum on our website in the coming days. And so happy for you to recommend it to your colleagues and friends. As a closing comment, and to put this into perspective a little bit, before the pandemic, about $50 billion a year was projected to be spent on renovation, modernization, and construction of schools, K-12 public schools. That's good news, a lot of investment in community. The bad news is that the significant majority of those schools are built on a model that was created in the last century. The standard passive classroom, hallways, lockers, etc. And what Jim and Greg and Kumar were talking about, and what all of the projects are now talking about, is that we need to think differently about how we create space for learning. And so when the Schmidt Futures Foundation reached out to us to start Reimagine America's Schools, the idea behind the whole initiative is to try to leverage that investment, that $50 billion investment, to create learning environments that are more conducive and supportive of new ways of learning and new ways of teaching. So during the pandemic, a lot of our work was put on the shelf because we couldn't be out in communities, but we have focused on 4 areas. One is design for equity, with a special focus on the next generation of community schools. The second is learning at the intersection of technology and design, creating a more dynamic relationship between technology and the design of the learning environment. The third is designing for crisis preparedness. Schools often become an ad hoc resource for neighborhoods during crisis, and we should be thinking a little more about how we design our schools to more quickly adapt and adopt to those situations. And finally, active learning, designing for active learning, which is what today's program was really about. How do we create learning environments that really do support the different kinds of programs that embrace STEM and STEAM and Maker and other related activities? So that's our work. We appreciate your interest. We're so glad that you joined us today. And in conclusion, I would remind you that our next forum is scheduled for December 1st. It's called Design for Equity and Inclusion, where we explore the role and responsibility and obligation to think more about equity and inclusion as we design our learning environments. Thank you all. Have a great day. Be safe. Bye-bye.